I am going to begin this one at a fashionable dinner table in Mayfair, on a spring evening in the year 1819, at the precise moment a handsome young lord, being witty at a quiet woman's expense to amuse the company, made the single most expensive joke of his entire life, though it would be some weeks before the bill came due, and he never in his wildest dreams imagined who would be presenting it. The dinner was at the house of Lady Sefton, one of those grand, crowded, fashionable dinners where the beautiful and the brilliant of the ton gather to admire themselves in one another. And the young lord in question was Rupert Aldous, Viscount Alderley, who was among the most beautiful and considered himself among the most brilliant, and who was, that evening, in tremendous form. He was handsome as the devil, dressed to the last exquisite thread, quick-tongued and careless and adored, the sort of fashionable young man who lights up a table and knows it, and spends the evening being amusing, and is forgiven everything on account of the amusement. And that evening the amusement had turned, as fashionable amusement so often does, to the sport of describing the company, a cruel, witty parlour game in which each guest in turn is summed up in a phrase, to the delight of all. It came round, at last, to a quiet woman seated some way down the table, in a good but unshowy gown, who had said very little all evening and been noticed by almost no one, a Miss Edith Barrow, a spinster of 29, plain of face and plain of dress, and plain, so far as anyone at that table had ever troubled to discover, of everything else. And someone, casting about the table for the next subject of the game and struggling, said, with a little laugh, that they hardly knew what to say of Miss Barrow, for really there was nothing to say at all. And Viscount Alderley, seizing the opening as a witty man seizes any opening, said, in his clear, carrying, amused voice, for the delight of the whole listening table, "But that is precisely the remarkable thing about Miss Barrow, that there is nothing remarkable about her whatever. She is unremarkable in every particular. I have sat 3 feet from her for 2 hours, and I could not, I confess, describe her afterward to save my life. She is the sort of woman one forgets while she is still in the room." He raised his glass, warming to it. "Indeed, I begin to think it a positive accomplishment, to be so entirely without any quality that draws the eye or holds the memory. It wants a kind of genius. Miss Barrow, I salute you. You are the most perfectly forgettable person I have ever had the honor to fail to remember." And the whole table laughed, that bright, cruel, fashionable laughter, and turned their attention elsewhere, the game rolling on, the quiet, unremarkable woman already forgotten again before the laughter had even died. And Miss Edith Barrow, at whom the whole cruelty had been aimed, sat quite still through it, and did not flush, and did not tremble, and did not, by so much as the flicker of an eyelash, give the table the satisfaction of a wound. She simply looked at Viscount Alderley for a moment, down the length of the table, with her plain, composed face, and then she smiled, a small, quiet, perfectly pleasant smile, and she said nothing at all. And I am going to stop us right there, on that smile, because I want you to hold it, and study it, and mark it well, for the whole of this story lives inside it. The table took that smile for exactly what it appeared to be, the meek, forgettable smile of an unremarkable woman swallowing an insult she had not the spirit to answer. It was nothing of the kind. It was, my dears, the smile of a woman who has just, very quietly, made up her mind. And Edith Barrow's mind, once made up, was one of the most formidable engines in the whole of London, though not one soul at Lady Sefton's table had the faintest notion of it. He called her unremarkable at 10:30 at night, and by noon the next day, before that handsome, careless young lord had so much as finished his breakfast, Edith Barrow owned every penny he owed in the world, and held his entire future in the palm of her plain, unremarkable hand. But I get ahead of myself, and there is our arrangement to keep first. Find the subscribe button and press it. It is free, and it takes a moment, and it means the next story finds you the instant I have it ready. And there is always a next, and they are always worth the having. And if you will not, then you owe me one, and I am very patient about my debts, and I never, ever forget who owes me what, nor exactly what it is worth, which, as it happens, is the entire subject of tonight's tale, the keeping of accounts, and the folly of underestimating who is keeping them. Now, before I show you what she did the next morning, I must take you back and tell you who Edith Barrow truly was. The woman the whole fashionable world had agreed to find forgettable. Come back with me. You will not forget her. I promise you that. She was the daughter of a banker, and not just any banker, but old Josiah Barrow, one of the shrewdest moneymen the City of London had produced in 50 years. Old Barrow had begun with nothing, and ended with a fortune that could have bought and sold half the peerage, and he had made it the way the great moneymen make it, not by trade, not by land, but by the subtlest and most powerful commerce of all, which is the commerce of money itself, lending it and borrowing it and moving it, and above all buying and selling debt. For that, my dears, is the great secret engine of the moneyed world, and I must explain it a little, for the whole of this story turns upon it. When a man borrows money, when a fashionable lord runs up his tailor's bill, and his wine merchant's bill, and his gaming debts and his mortgages, those debts do not simply sit there. They can be bought and sold. The tailor, wanting his money now and despairing of the lord ever paying, will sell the debt to a moneyman for a portion of its value, and the moneyman now holds the lord's note, and may collect it, or hold it, or sell it on. And a man who makes it his business to buy up such debts, quietly, cheaply, patiently, may come, in time, to hold the notes of a great many fashionable people, and thereby to hold a very great deal of quiet power. For the man who holds your debt holds you. He may leave you in peace, and you never think of him, or he may call in what you owe, all at once, and ruin you between breakfast and dinner. Old Josiah Barrow had built a fortune understanding this better than any man alive. And he had one child, a daughter, and, like more than one shrewd father in the tales I tell you, he found in her a mind that was the twin of his own, and being far too sensible a man to waste a genius merely because it had been born in a girl, he taught her everything. He taught Edith the whole subtle science of money and debt and credit. He took her into his confidence and his counting house from the time she was a child, and he found, as such fathers find, that his daughter had inherited not merely his gift, but a portion beyond his own, a coolness, a patience, a genius for reading men and markets, that he freely admitted surpassed him. Edith, he used to say, could hold the whole of London in her hand, and none of them would ever feel the fingers close, and when he died, a few years before our story, he left her the whole of it, the vast fortune, and the intricate web of debts and mortgages and investments, and the confidential agents who managed it, and the gift to run it all. And Edith Barrow ran it, quietly, brilliantly, entirely in secret, for the same iron reason that has run through so many of these tales. The world would not permit a woman to do such work openly. A woman financier, a woman who bought and sold the debts of lords, was a thing the moneyed world could not conceive of, and would not countenance. So Edith operated as her father had taught her to, through discreet male agents and confidential men of business, her own name never appearing, her own hand never seen. And to the fashionable world above, she was merely Miss Edith Barrow, the late banker's plain spinster daughter, a woman of some comfortable means, quiet and unremarkable, invited to dinners to make up numbers, and otherwise entirely overlooked. And here is the thing I most want you to understand, the thing that turns the whole insult inside out. Edith Barrow did not merely tolerate being overlooked, she cultivated it, she wielded it. For a woman in her secret trade, being thought unremarkable was not a wound. It was the single most valuable asset she possessed. Because they thought her furniture, the fashionable world spoke freely in front of her, dropped their guard, let slip who was ruined and who was rising, whose estate was mortgaged to the roof, and whose marriage was a matter of debts. All the intimate financial gossip of the ton, poured out at 100 dinner tables in front of the plain, quiet woman they had all agreed to forget. And Edith Barrow sat there, unremarkable, forgotten, missing nothing, and went home and acted upon it. She knew, sitting at Lady Sefton's table that spring evening, the true financial position of very nearly every brilliant soul in that room, down to the shilling. She held, through her agents, the actual paper on a good number of them. She was, in cold, sober fact, the most quietly powerful person at that entire glittering dinner, and every single one of them, including the handsome lord who called her forgettable, would have laughed in your face if you had told them so. So when Viscount Alderley raised his glass and pronounced her the most perfectly forgettable person he had ever failed to remember, he was not, as he imagined, crushing a defenseless nobody for the amusement of the table. He was, though he had not the faintest idea of it, insulting the one person in that room who could ruin every soul in it before their carriages reached home. It was, as I said, the most expensive joke of his life, and it was about to come due. Now let me tell you about Viscount Alderley, and about the mountain of debt he was dancing on top of, for he too had a secret, and his was the exact and opposite twin of hers. Rupert Aldous, Viscount Alderley, was 26, and beautiful, and charming, and adored, and utterly, catastrophically ruined, and almost no one knew it, least of all himself. He had inherited a decent title, and a decent estate, and a decent fortune, all of which he had spent the years since squandering in the grand fashionable manner. The horses, the tailors, the clubs, the gaming tables, the whole glittering expensive business of being one of the most fashionable young men in London. He lived, as such men live, entirely on credit. For the beautiful thing about being a fashionable lord is that the whole world will extend you credit endlessly. The tailors and the wine merchants and the moneylenders all falling over themselves to lend to a viscount, certain that a lord's debts are as good as gold. And so Rupert had run up debts in every quarter of London, cheerfully, carelessly, never troubling his handsome head about them, in the serene, fashionable faith that somehow, eventually, it would all come right, that he would marry an heiress, or a rich relation would die, or something, and the reckoning would be indefinitely postponed, as it always had been. But the reckoning does not postpone forever, and Rupert's had crept, unnoticed by him, terribly close. His estate was mortgaged past its worth. His creditors, scattered across London, were beginning, separately, quietly, to grow uneasy. He was, in the cold arithmetic that Edith Barrow could have read at a glance, perhaps one bad season away from the whole glittering edifice coming down. But here is the thing that had saved him thus far, the thing that lets such men dance on the edge of ruin for years. His debts were scattered. He owed a little to this tailor, and a little to that wine merchant, and a great deal to this moneylender, and more to that mortgage holder, all separate, all unconnected. And scattered creditors are weak creditors, for each holds only a piece of you, and each may be juggled and stalled and played off against the next, indefinitely. So long as no single hand held all his paper, Rupert could dance. The danger, the one mortal danger to a man in his position, was that all his scattered debts should ever be gathered into a single hand. For the hand that holds all your paper at once, holds all of you at once, and may close, whenever it pleases. And there is no juggling, and no stalling, and no escape. One creditor holding everything can ruin you with a single word. Rupert Aldous did not think about this, because Rupert Aldous did not think about his debts at all. They were beneath his notice, like the servants, like the plain women at dinner parties. He drifted through his gilded life, certain the bill would never truly come, being witty at the tables and beautiful at the balls, and, on the particular spring evening of our tale, amusing himself and the company by pronouncing a quiet spinster the most forgettable creature in London. He should not have done that. Of all the people in London, he should not have done that to her, for Edith Barrow knew his position to the last farthing, had known it for months, from 100 dropped words at 100 dinners, and she knew the one thing that could destroy him, which was the gathering of all his scattered debts into a single hand. She had never troubled to do it. Why should she? He was nothing to her, one more careless, indebted lord among dozens. His paper was scattered about the town, and she had let it lie, as one lets many things lie. Until he called her unremarkable at Lady Sefton's table, to the laughter of the room, and Edith Barrow smiled her small, quiet smile, and made up her mind. I must tell you one thing more before the next morning, for it is the seed of the whole romance, and without it, Edith is merely cold, and she was never merely cold. She had noticed him. That is the truth she would not have admitted to a living soul. Among all the brilliant, careless, fashionable young men she sat unregarded amongst at those dinners, Edith Barrow had, over the past season, found her eye drawn, against her own better judgment, against everything her cool, clear mind told her, to Viscount Alderley. Not merely because he was beautiful, she was far too sensible to be moved by mere beauty, but because there was, beneath the fashionable wit, a quickness, a real intelligence flashing under the shallow surface, a mind that might have been something remarkable had it ever been asked to be anything at all. She had watched him be brilliant about nothing, evening after evening, and thought, with a small private ache she despised in herself, what a waste. There is a real man in there, buried under all that fashionable nonsense, and no one will ever trouble to dig him out. And he will drink and game and charm himself into an early grave, and never once become the thing he might have been. And, foolishly, she told herself, unforgivably foolishly, for a woman of her sense, she had let herself, once or twice, imagine that he might one day look down the table and see her, the quiet woman, with the mind to match his own buried one, and that something might— No, she had squashed the thought each time it rose, ruthlessly, as she squashed every sentimental folly, but it had risen. And so when he looked down the table at last, and saw nothing, nothing at all, and pronounced her the most forgettable creature in London to the laughter of the room, it did not merely insult Edith Barrow's dignity, it killed a small foolish hope she had not known she was still nursing, and the killing of a hope stings in a way that mere insult never can. That is why she acted, not from cold revenge alone, from the sharp, particular hurt of a woman who had, against all her sense, seen something worth caring for in a man, and been shown, in front of a laughing room, exactly how invisible she was to him. She would make herself uninvisible. She would do the one remarkable thing entirely within her power, and if he could not see the woman, why then, he would very shortly see the creditor, for that, at least, no man on earth could overlook. She went home from Lady Sefton's, and she did not weep, and she did not rage. She sat down at her writing desk, in the quiet of the night, and she wrote out a set of instructions to her agents in her small, precise hand, and the instructions were these: to acquire, immediately, quietly, and at whatever cost was necessary for speed, every debt owed by Rupert Aldous, Viscount Alderley, in the whole of London. And because Edith Barrow knew his position to the farthing, and knew exactly where every scattered piece of his paper lay, and because she had the fortune to pay, and the agents to move fast, and the ruthlessness, when finally roused, to spend freely for speed, it was done by noon the next day. Her men fanned out across London at first light, to the tailors and the wine merchants and the money-lenders and the mortgage holders, offering ready cash, on the spot, for the Viscount's debts, and the creditors, uneasy and delighted to have their doubtful money made suddenly good, sold gladly, every one of them, asking no questions about who the mysterious purchaser might be. And so, before Rupert Aldous had finished his late fashionable breakfast, every scattered piece of his debt had been gathered up out of 100 hands and drawn into a single one, hers. The tailor's bill, the wine merchant's bill, the gaming debts, the moneylender's notes, the very mortgage on his estate, all of it, every farthing he owed in the world, now belonged to Edith Barrow. The scattered creditors who could be juggled forever had become one creditor who could ruin him with a word. His whole future lay in her plain, unremarkable hand. And she had done it, mark this, for it is the measure of her. She had done it in a single night and morning, decisively, brilliantly. an operation that would have taxed the finest financier in London, in cool answer to a dinner-table insult. That was Edith Barrow. That was the woman the whole fashionable world had agreed to find forgettable. He had called her the most unremarkable person in London, and by way of reply, without raising her voice, without shedding a tear, she had performed one of the most remarkable overnight strokes the city had seen in years, and made herself the mistress of his entire fate. If ever a man was answered, it was Rupert Aldous, though he did not yet know he had been. She did not intend, I should tell you, to ruin him. She was angry, and she was hurt, but she was not cruel, and she did not lie awake plotting his destruction. She was not entirely certain, that first morning, exactly what she meant to do with the extraordinary power she had just seized. She knew only that she had needed, for her own dignity, for the sake of the small killed hope, for the simple assertion of her own reality against his contempt, to stop being invisible to him, and that there is no surer cure for a man's failure to see you than to acquire the power to end his world. She held his fate now. What she would do with it, she would decide when he came to her. And come to her he would. That she knew. For a man who suddenly discovers that all his debt has been gathered into a single unknown hand, does precisely one thing, and does it very fast indeed. He goes, frantic, to find out whose hand it is. It took Rupert 3 days to understand that the sky had fallen, and I am told those were 3 of the most educational days of his life. It began with a note from his tailor, a grovelling, apologetic note, hoping his lordship would not think ill, but the tailor had found himself obliged to sell his lordship's account, and trusted the new holder would prove accommodating. Rupert thought nothing of it. Then came a similar note from his wine merchant, then from one of his moneylenders, and then, as the same word reached him from every quarter of his scattered indebted life, all at once, all within 3 days, a cold and unfamiliar dread began to creep up the spine of the careless young lord, and he went, at last, to his own man of business, and demanded to know what in God's name was happening. And his man of business, grey-faced, told him the thing that no indebted lord ever wishes to hear. That every debt he owed in the world, every scattered piece of it, the bills and the notes and the very mortgage on Alderley, had been bought up, in a single stroke, over the course of a single morning, by one purchaser. That his lordship no longer owed 100 creditors who might be juggled, but one creditor who held everything, and that this one creditor, whoever they were, now had it entirely within their power to call in the whole of his lordship's debt at once, whenever they chose, and the man of business did not need to finish the sentence. Rupert understood. A man who owes everything to one hand is that hand's creature. Utterly. He could be ruined, bankrupted, his estate seized, his name disgraced, his whole glittering life ended, at the pleasure of a single unknown person, on any morning that person cared to choose. "Who?" Rupert whispered, white as his own fine linen. "Who holds it? Who holds all my paper?" And that, it turned out, was the hardest question of all, for the purchaser had bought through agents, discreetly, and the name behind it was buried deep. It took Rupert a further week of frantic, terrified inquiry, a week in which he did not sleep, in which the whole careless edifice of his life cracked and swayed around him, in which he understood for the first time in his beautiful, useless existence exactly how far out over the abyss he had been dancing, to trace the hidden hand to its source. And when at last his inquiries ran it to ground, when the name was finally spoken to him, Rupert Aldous sat down very suddenly, because his legs would not hold him. The purchaser was Miss Edith Barrow. Miss Edith Barrow, the plain, quiet spinster from Lady Sefton's dinner, the unremarkable woman he had not been able to describe afterward to save his life, the most perfectly forgettable person he had ever had the honor to fail to remember. She held every farthing he owed in the world. She could ruin him with a word. And Rupert Aldous, sitting there ashen and reeling, cast his mind back, with dawning and total horror, to a spring evening not 2 weeks past, and to a witty little speech he had made to amuse a dinner table, and to a quiet woman who had smiled a small, quiet smile and said nothing at all. And he understood, all at once, and all the way to the bottom of him, exactly what he had done, and exactly what that smile had meant, and exactly how catastrophically wrong a fashionable man can be about which people in a room are worth his notice. He had insulted the most powerful person at Lady Sefton's table, and the next morning she had reached out and taken his entire life into her hand, and now he had to go and face her. He went to her the very next day, and he went, for the first time in his life, as a supplicant, and it was, though he did not know it, the beginning of the making of him. He came to her fine, quiet house, braced for anything, for cold triumph, for gloating, for the cruelty he would have shown, perhaps, in her place. He got none of it. Edith Barrow received him in her drawing room, plainly dressed, perfectly composed, and looked at him with those quiet eyes that missed nothing, and waited for him to speak. And Rupert, who had prepared a dozen fine, fashionable speeches on the way over, and forgot every one of them the moment he stood before her, found himself, for once in his life, with nothing to say but the truth. "You hold my debt," he said. "All of it. You can ruin me whenever you please." He swallowed. "I came to ask what you mean to do, and to," he forced it out, "to say that I understand, now, exactly why you did it. I insulted you, at Lady Sefton's, cruelly and stupidly, for the amusement of a room full of people not worth amusing. I called you unremarkable, and you have answered me by proving yourself the most remarkable person I have ever had the colossal misfortune to underestimate. I have never in my life been so comprehensively and so deservedly put in my place. So, do what you will, Miss Barrow. I find I cannot even resent it. It is the most honest lesson anyone has ever taught me, and I have earned every penny of it." And Edith Barrow, who had braced herself for bluster or for pleading, was rather disarmed by this, for it is a great deal harder to remain coldly angry at a man who agrees with you completely and apologizes without excuse. But she did not soften. She was far too clear-eyed for that. "I have not yet decided what I mean to do," she said. "That is the truth. I did not buy your debt out of any settled plan, my lord. I bought it because you stood up at a dinner table and told a room full of people that I was too insignificant to be worth remembering, and I found I wished to demonstrate, if only to myself, that you were mistaken. I have demonstrated it. You will not, I think, forget me now. A faint dry edge. As to your ruin, I hold it in my hand, certainly. Whether I close the hand is another question, and one I have not answered. You are entirely in my power, Lord Alderley. It is a novel sensation for you, I imagine. I recommend you sit with it a while. It is remarkably clarifying." And Rupert sat with it. And here is where the story turns, and where the shallow, fashionable lord began, under the terrible clarifying pressure of being wholly at a woman's mercy, to discover the man buried inside him. The man Edith had glimpsed across a dozen dinner tables, and privately mourned as a waste. For being in her power forced him, for the first time in his life, to actually reckon with his own ruin, with his own uselessness, with the whole hollow, glittering waste he had made of his gifts and his years. And in the weeks that followed, for she did not close the hand, and did not free him either, but let him hang, suspended, at her mercy, which was the most educational thing that had ever happened to him, Rupert Aldous began to change. He came to see her often. He had to. His fate was in her hands, and there was much to discuss about the debt. And Edith, watching him warily across those interviews, saw the change begin, and did not quite trust it, and watched all the harder. She saw him stop being witty, and start being honest. She saw him, forced at last to look his own finances in the face, begin, clumsily at first, then with growing seriousness, to take responsibility for the wreck of his life, to inquire into his own affairs, to understand his own position, to think, for the first time, about how a man might actually climb out of the pit he had danced into. And she saw, this was the dangerous part, the part that threatened her hard-won composure, she saw the buried mind come out. For when Rupert Aldous finally turned his real intelligence, so long wasted on fashionable nonsense, onto a real problem, it turned out to be a very good mind indeed. And the conversations between them, which began as cold negotiations between a creditor and her victim, became, slowly, dangerously, something else. Two quick minds meeting, at last, as equals, over the honest, hard problem of a ruined man's redemption. She found herself, to her horror, enjoying them. She found the real man coming out from under the fashionable ruin, exactly as she had once imagined he might. And she found, worst of all, that the more real he became, the more she liked him, and the more she liked him, the more she despised herself for it. Because a woman who holds a man's entire fate in her hand can never, ever trust that his warmth toward her is anything but the desperate charm of a creature trying to survive. And then Rupert made things a great deal more complicated by falling in love with her. He knew it was hopeless before he knew it was real, and that is to his credit. For Rupert Aldous, discovering somewhere in those weeks that he had fallen genuinely, helplessly in love with the plain, remarkable woman who held his ruin in her hand, understood at once, being no longer quite the fool he had been, the appalling position it put him in. Think of it, my dears, from his side, and you will see the trap with perfect clarity. He was a ruined man, wholly in her financial power, and she was a woman of great fortune. If he were to court her, if he were to marry her, every single one of his problems would vanish at a stroke. His debt, which she held, would dissolve into the marriage. Her great fortune would become, by the cruel law of the age, his own. He would go from ruin to riches, and from her victim to her master, in a single ceremony. Which meant that any suit he made her, however sincere, would be, in every appearance, the most nakedly mercenary act imaginable. A bankrupt lord, marrying his way out of ruin and into a fortune, by wedding the very woman who could otherwise destroy him. There was no possible way for Rupert to court Edith Barrow that would not appear to be exactly the cynical calculation it would have been in 9 men out of 10. And Edith, clear-eyed, wary, twice-burned Edith, would see it so, and would be right to, and would never, ever be able to believe otherwise. He saw all this, and so Rupert Aldous did the thing that finally, fully proved him worthy of her, the hard, honorable, self-denying thing that the old shallow Rupert could never have conceived of. He came to her one evening, and he told her the truth of his heart, and then he told her what he meant to do about it. "I have to say 2 things to you," he said, "and I have rehearsed neither, because I find with you that rehearsed things turn to ash in my mouth. The first is that I have fallen in love with you, completely, not with the woman who holds my debt. With you, Edith, the mind and the wit and the quiet, formidable soul of you that I was too great a fool to see across a dinner table until you reached out and rearranged my entire life to teach me to look. I have never met anyone like you. I never shall. And I have discovered, these past weeks, that the conversations in this drawing room are the only hours of my whole useless life in which I have felt truly alive, and truly myself, and truly seen, and I do not know how I am to go on without them." He drew a breath. "And the second thing is this, that I am not going to court you. I am not going to ask for your hand. I am going to do the exact opposite. I am going to stay entirely away from any word of love, and I am going to tell you precisely why, so that you do not mistake it." Edith, who had braced for a proposal she would have had to distrust and refuse, went very still. "Because I hold nothing but debt," Rupert said, "and you hold everything. Any suit I made you now would be the act of a fortune hunter escaping ruin, and it would look so, and it would be so, whatever my heart knew, and you would never be able to believe it was anything else. And you would be right not to believe it. I will not do that to you. I will not offer you a love you cannot trust, and make you choose between your heart and your good sense, and poison the one real thing I have ever felt with the stink of my own convenience." He stood very straight. "So, here is what I am going to do instead. I am going to pay you back, every farthing, myself. I am going to sell what must be sold, and retrench, and work. Edith, God help me, a viscount who has never done a day's work in his life, and reform my whole ruined existence, and clear the entire debt you hold, by my own effort, however many years it takes. And I am not going to say one word of love to you until I owe you nothing, until I am a free man, who can come to you with empty hands and empty pockets, and offer you nothing on earth but myself, so that if you should ever, by some miracle, want me, neither of us will ever have to wonder for one single instant whether I came for your fortune or for you. That is the only way I can ever honestly court you, so I am going to earn my way out of your debt first, not to escape you, but to be worthy of asking. And if it takes me 10 years, and you marry another man in the meantime, then at least I will have become, too late, the man I should always have been, and you will have made me so, by refusing to let me be anything less. Which is more than I deserve, and exactly what I need, and I love you for it, and I am going to leave now before I say a great deal more than I have any right to. And he bowed, and he left, and Edith Barrow stood alone in her drawing room, and found, to her very great astonishment, that the cool, clear composure she had held through insult and power and everything else had entirely deserted her, and that she was weeping, for she had just been given the one thing she had never in her life expected to receive, and the one thing that could possibly have reached her guarded heart. Proof, real, costly, unmistakable proof, that a man had chosen the hard road specifically to make his love unimpeachable, that he wanted her, the woman, so truly that he was willing to spend years clawing out of ruin by his own hand, rather than let his love be cheapened by convenience. He had removed, deliberately, at enormous cost to himself, the very thing that would have made his love suspect. There was no mercenary man alive who would do such a thing, only a man who truly, purely loved. She let him go on with it for a while, for she was still Edith Barrow, and she had to be sure, and she was not a woman to be swept off her feet, even by so fine a gesture. And Rupert was as good as his word. He sold his horses, and let his fine rooms, and dismissed his fashionable life, and set himself with grim, honest determination to the unglamorous business of digging out of his ruin. And Edith watched him do it, week by week, and saw that it was real, saw the shallow, fashionable lord she had once privately mourned becoming, in earnest, the substantial man she had glimpsed, buried under all that waste. He did not come courting, he kept his word absolutely. He paid down his debt to her, farthing by hard-won farthing, and spoke to her only of business, and never once by word or look pressed the love he had confessed, and the restraint of it, the patient, honest, self-denying restraint, told her more surely than any wooing ever could that the love was true. And at last, some months on, when he had cleared a good portion of it, and shown beyond any doubt that he would clear the rest, if it took him a decade, Edith Barrow decided that she had let the man punish himself long enough, and that she was, after all, mistress of the whole situation, and might do with it precisely as she pleased. So she sent for him, and when he came, wary and honest and braced for more business, she did a thing that was entirely her own, and entirely characteristic, and I love her for it to this day. She handed him a document, and Rupert, taking it, uncomprehending, read it, and read it again, and his hands began to shake. For it was a full and complete discharge of the entire debt. Every farthing he owed her, the whole mountain of it, forgiven, cancelled, wiped away. She had freed him, utterly. He owed her nothing in all the world. "There," said Edith Barrow, "it is done. You are free, my lord. You owe me not one penny, and you never shall again. The debt is gone." She looked at him steadily, and there was, beneath her composure, something bright and frightened and hopeful that he had never seen there before. "I have done it for one reason, and I will tell you the reason plainly, since we have both grown tired of things left unsaid. You told me you would not speak one word of love to me until you owed me nothing, until you could come to me a free man with empty hands, so that neither of us need ever wonder whether you came for my fortune or for me. Very well. I have made you that free man. Tonight, at a stroke. You owe me nothing. You are entirely at liberty. You may walk out of this house and never look back, and there is no debt on earth to hold you. There is now no possible mercenary reason for you to want me, and no possible reason for me to doubt you if you do." She lifted her chin, and her voice was not quite steady. "So I have removed the obstacle you set yourself, my lord, because I found I could not bear to wait 10 years for you to remove it. And now I am going to ask you the question you swore you would not ask me, and turn the whole business on its head, because I am a woman of independent fortune, and I may propose to whom I please, and hang the convention. You are free. You owe me nothing. There is nothing in it for you but me. Knowing that, wanting nothing, owing nothing, free to walk away, will you have me, Rupert? Not the creditor, not the fortune, me, the unremarkable woman you could not remember, who turned out to be the only one you couldn't forget." And Rupert Aldous, free, unburdened, offered everything and owing nothing, with no earthly reason to want her but the truest one there is, dropped the discharge of his debt onto the floor, and crossed the room, and took the remarkable woman who had freed him into his arms, and gave her his answer, past all possibility of doubt. "Yes," he said, when he could speak. "1,000 times, yes. Not the creditor, not the fortune, you, the most remarkable person I have ever known, who taught a vain fool to see, and then, having every reason to ruin him, chose to save him instead. I called you unremarkable, Edith, at a dinner table, to make a room laugh." He held her face in his hands. "It is the greatest lie I ever told, and I have spent every day since discovering just how great a lie it was. You are the most remarkable soul in England, and I am going to spend the rest of my life proving that I have finally learned to see it." And that, my dear listeners, is where I leave them, in a quiet drawing room, a freed man and the formidable woman who freed him, a discharged debt lying forgotten on the floor between them, and two people who had each, in their different ways, refused to let love be cheapened by convenience, finding out that what remained, once all the money was cleared away, was the realest thing either had ever known. They were married before the year was out, and it astonished the fashionable world, for the ton could make neither head nor tail of it, that the beautiful Viscount Alderley should marry the plain, unremarkable Miss Barrow, and there was a great deal of clever speculation about it, most of it wrong. Only slowly did the truth of it seep out, the whole extraordinary tale of the insult and the debt bought overnight, and the lord brought to his knees, and the love that grew in the wreckage. And when it did, the fashionable world was forced to perform a rather dramatic revision of its opinion of Miss Edith Barrow, and to discover, all at once, that the woman they had spent years overlooking as forgettable was in fact one of the most powerful and remarkable people any of them had ever failed to notice. She rather enjoyed the revision. She had earned it. And Rupert became, under her hand, exactly the man she had once glimpsed buried under all the fashionable waste, for she taught him her own trade, in time, the whole subtle science of money and debt, and found in him an apt and eager pupil, and the two of them ran her great financial concerns together, mind to mind, equal to equal, the reformed lord and the banker's brilliant daughter. And it is a matter of record that the House of Alderley became, in the years that followed, one of the quiet great powers of the moneyed world, and that a good many proud fashionable people who had laughed at Lady Sefton's dinner discovered, over the years, that their debts had a way of ending up in the hands of the very woman they had once found so forgettable, and learned, one by one, to be a great deal more careful about whom they dismissed at dinner. If you ask me what this story is truly about, I will tell you it is about the profound and dangerous folly of the word unremarkable. For there is no such thing as an unremarkable person, my dears. There are only people we have not troubled to look at closely enough, and the quiet, plain, overlooked ones at the foot of the table are so very often the ones holding the most power and the deepest depths, precisely because the world's failure to see them has taught them to keep both well hidden. Rupert Aldous looked at Edith Barrow and saw nothing worth remembering, and the nothing he saw turned out to hold his entire fate in its hand, and a mind to match his own, and a heart worth 100 of the brilliant beauties he had wasted his youth admiring. He learned, the hard way, the lesson I would leave with you tonight, that the person you dismiss as unremarkable may simply be remarkable in ways you are too shallow, as yet, to perceive, and that it is a very great deal wiser, and safer, and kinder, to assume that every quiet soul at the table contains whole worlds you have not bothered to discover, than to find it out, as he did, by insulting the one person in the room who held the pen over your ruin. You have sat by my fire, through an insult and an overnight reckoning, and a love that had to clear a mountain of debt before it could be trusted, and I will not pretend I could have told it without you at the other end of the line. If it has given you something tonight, a warmth, a satisfaction, a quiet resolve never again to call any living soul unremarkable, then I would ask you, before you go, to subscribe to Moonlight at Mayfair, for there are a great many more of these, and every one has a heart, and I should hate for you to miss a single one. It costs you nothing, and it means more to me than I can say from this side of the fire. And if you still will not, well, you know what I am going to say. You owe me one. You have owed me, since a smile crossed a plain woman's face at a dinner table. I am patient, and I never forget a debt, and I always know exactly whose paper I hold. Subscribe to Moonlight at Mayfair, and come back to me beneath the soft light of the evening star, where every love is hard won, and every ending is deserved. Good night, and do take the greatest care, won't you?